Hey everyone, Nico here. In today's video, we're taking a look at an awesome Excel feature called pivot tables. Now, if you've never heard of pivot tables or never used them before, then this is the one for you. We can use pivot tables to take a data set like this one and very quickly turn it into this. Now, the best part is it's really simple and you don't need to know any formulas or functions. Now, for this example, we will use Excellent Candy, which is the little pretend store that my kids have set up. I've recorded their transactions, and in the hope that they will foster a real love for Excel, I am going to use pivot tables to analyze the data and answer some questions like who is the best salesperson, or which product is the most profitable, or even what time of day is the best for selling. Alright, so firstly, we need to make sure that our data is set up properly. Now, as you can see in this one, each row is a separate transaction, and then each column has a different piece of information. For example, the date of the sale. Who was the salesperson? What is the product that they sold? We also have value information. For example, what was the cost of the product? What did they sell it for? And then how much profit did they make? Because, they need to make a living. And then also, what is the time of day when that sale took place? Now, there are three things we need to keep in mind with the data set. We need to make sure that there is a heading to every column. We also need to make sure there are no blank rows or columns. And we need to make sure there are no totals or any subtotals in the data set. And that's it really. So once we are happy with our data set, we can go ahead and create a pivot table. To do that, I'll go Insert. And for this one, I'll have a quick look at recommended pivot tables. Now, that is useful if you have no idea what you're doing and you just want Excel to give you some ideas. So you can see they've given us some examples. They say, how about you go and analyze the profit and you break it down by time of day? Or maybe the cost. We're going to analyze the cost by time of day. Now, I'm going to cancel out of this because we will be creating our own pivot table. So instead, I'll go Insert, Pivot Table. Alright, so we can see Excel has picked up the data set. It's done a pretty good job, so I don't need to change anything there. But then I need to say if I want it to be in a new worksheet or in the existing worksheet. I'll put it on a new worksheet, so we don't need to change anything here. Okay, now we can see it's created this little shell, which is the empty pivot table shell, and this thing that pops up on the side, the pivot table fields pane. Now we can already recognize something in there. We can see that these are the headings of all of our columns. Now, to build a pivot table, we will take these headings and we will drag them into these four areas. Let's have a look at an example. We want to work out how much did each kid make selling these goodies and who sold the most. Okay, so we want to analyze by salesperson. So we'll take salesperson and we'll drag it to the rows area. Then we know we want to analyze sales. So I'll take the sales price field and drag it to the values area. And that's it. We can see total sales of $378. And we can see that Dean sold the most with $142. Followed by Matt with 106, Ali with 94, and little Tommy with 36. Okay, so let's say we then want to further analyze it by product. I'll then take the product field and drop it underneath the salesperson in the rows area. And we can see we now have a breakdown by salesperson and then a further breakdown by product. So we can analyze Dean's sales of $142 and we can see that $70 came from M&Ms, $24 came from dark chocolate drops, and so forth. Now, to make it even clearer, we can sort this by size. So to do this, I will right click, sort largest to smallest. There we go. Now you can see that there are these little twisties next to the names. If I click them, then we roll it up back to the higher level, which is a breakdown by salesperson. So as you can see, no formulas or functions. We can just click around and make the report look the way we want it to look. We can collapse them all at once, right click, expand and collapse entire field, and we're back to a breakdown just by salesperson. Alright, so I'll expand them back out, right click, expand entire field, and instead of having it run down like this, I want it to be a bit more compact, so I'll take product and drag it to the columns area. And you'll see now we have a breakdown on the rows for salesperson, the breakdown on the columns for the different products. So we get the same information, but it's much more compact. And then we can make it even clearer to see who has made the most sales by right-clicking somewhere here in the grand total area and sorting. So we can right-click and sort largest to smallest. And now we have it in descending order. Okay, so we've analyzed each kid's sales, but what if we want to see how many items they sold each? Because each line is one product, we can actually just count the number of lines and identify how many of each product was sold. So to do that, we'll still use the sales values, but instead of adding it up, we'll just count them. So I'll right click and summarize values by, I'll change it from sum to count. And that's it. So now we can see 104 items sold, 40 of those were sold by Dean. And if we look at which item was the most popular, out of the 104, 27 were M&Ms. So really popular, so we better make sure we have enough stock of that one. Alright, so now let's have a look at the time of day. Try and work out when they should go out and sell, which time slots to focus on. Because they're out day and night at the moment, we want to make sure they just focus on the time slots that are most profitable. So to do that, we can just pull everything out and start again. So let's get rid of everything. We again want a breakdown by product. So we put products in the rows. This time we put time of day in the columns, and again sales in the values area. So now we can see the $378 in sales. The bulk of that happened in the evening, followed closely by the afternoon. So if they really want to focus on 2 time slots, it probably makes sense to sell in the afternoon and in the evening. Maybe people feel a bit guilty eating chocolates in the morning, but in the late afternoon, there's no willpower left and sales are good. Okay, but we have other value columns as well. We also have a profit column. So now let's see which product is the most profitable. So instead of pulling everything out, I'll just chop and change. I'll get rid of sales and instead I'll bring in profit. We'll still have it by product because we want to know which product is the most profitable. And we can see 68 dark chocolate drops. To make it a bit simpler, right click, sort largest to smallest. So we can see it's dark chocolate drops followed by M&Ms all the way down to Caramello Koalas. So we may actually consider dropping that one. I mean, that is my favorite, so I'm probably eating the last little bit of profit that they would have made. Okay, so as you can see, pretty simple the way we go about it, but already so much information that we've gleaned from our data set. But we've still only barely scratched the surface of what can be done with pivot tables. So let's have a look at a couple more advanced things we can do. Now, while we have the profit values up, let's see what percentage of total profit each product or each kid contributed. Now to do that, I'll right click, I'll go show values as, and change it to percentage of grand total. Now I'll get rid of some decimals just to make it a bit easier to understand. Okay, and we can see dark chocolate drops contributed 39% of all the profit, with Caramello Koalas only 5%. And then how about if we look at how each kid contributed to the profit? For that, I'll get rid of time of day. And instead, I'll bring in salesperson. Okay, and we can see Matt contributed about 1/3 of all the profit, 33%. Dean, another 1/3, 34%. And then I'll put Ali and Tommy together. They've been working as a team. So the two of them together, 32%, so contributing the other 1/3 of all the profit. Alright, so how about we then want to analyze the sales over a period of time. So we want to see the monthly sales, for example. So let's just untick everything and start again. I want to analyze monthly sales by salesperson. So let's drag sales price to the values area and salesperson to the rows area. So we can see this is still in percentage because of our previous analysis. So I'll just go comma, get rid of those decimals. There we go, our $378 in sales. And now we want to drag date to the columns area. And as you can see, it's grouped it up by month, January, February, March. If you remember, there were lots of dates, but Excel knows that would be a pretty lame pivot table, 40, 50, 60 columns wide. So it groups it up by month. Based on this analysis, we can also see why Tommy's sales are so low. He only started in March. Now, if we want to look at the daily sales, we can click on one of these little twisties and we can see, okay, pretty consistent throughout, but it's a bit too much information. So let's just roll it back up to keep it at the monthly view. All right, so the pivot table itself is obviously very useful and easy to change around until it gives us the information we're looking for. But sometimes we need a little bit more, like a graph. Well, we can create what's called a pivot chart, which presents whatever is in the pivot table as a graph. All right, so to illustrate the pivot chart, let's first create a pivot table that shows a breakdown of sales. We already have that. By salesperson, we already have that. Further broken down by product. So I'll get rid of all the date information and I'll bring in product. And now I'll insert my pivot chart. So I'll click anywhere within the pivot table I want to use, insert pivot chart. And you can see it gives us a ton of options. There are column charts, line charts, pie charts, bar charts. We can even use some of these weird ones like a 3D surface chart. But I think for now, let's just stick to a good old column chart. This is a good one, the clustered column, but the one I want to use right now is the stacked column. Because with this one, we can actually then compare the total sales for each kid. All right, so we pick that one and go okay, and that's it. That's all you do, it just inserts it. Now the cool thing is any changes that you make to the pivot table immediately get reflected in the pivot chart. So if I sort my pivot table, so let's go again, right click, sort largest to smallest, you'll see it just updates automatically. Now even if I move fields around, pull some out, put others back in, like say we get rid of the salesperson, but instead we look at a breakdown of the time of day, we can compare afternoon, evening, lunch, morning. Again, let's sort those ones, or let's sort by product. Right click, sort largest to smallest. So now M&Ms go first because most of the sales came from M&Ms, all the way down to poor little caramello koalas. All right, so you can see why dashboards are also often built using pivot tables, as they're just so versatile. We can create a whole bunch of different graphs showing different things, all based on the same data set. Now, as you can see here, pivot tables aren't as scary or complicated as you may have thought. They're actually pretty easy, as it's just dragging and dropping, and there are no formulas required. Best way to get a feel for them is just try them out. Just practice dragging and dropping into the 4 pivot table areas. Now, I think this is a pretty good start, but if you need a proper step-by-step walkthrough of 10 essential topics regarding pivot tables with some Excel files for you to try out, I suggest you take a look at the ebook I put together when I was stuck at home in Corona lockdown. It's called 10 Steps to Pivot Table Success. There's a link to it below in the description. And that's it for now. So I hope you've enjoyed this brief introduction. I really look forward to hearing some encouraging stories of how it helped you to save tons of time or just have some fun analyzing your kids' sales. Thanks guys. See ya.